Our first keynote speaker is Lieutenant General Paul Nakasone, the Commanding General of U.S. Army Cyber Command. A native of White Bear Lake, Minnesota, General Nakasone is a graduate of St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, where he received his commission through the Reserve Officers Training Corps. General Nakasone has held command and staff positions across all levels of the Army, with assignments in the United States, the Republic of Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He commanded a company, battalion, and brigade, and has served as the senior intel officer at the battalion, division, and corps levels. Previously, General Nakasone commanded the Cyber National Mission Force at U.S. Cyber Command and was the Director of Intelligence, J2 International Security Assistance Force Joint Command in Kabul, Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage General Nakasone.
Great to see you. Thanks a lot for the welcome. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a great day to be here with you. So good to see so many friends, colleagues. Let me begin, first of all, by saying thank you to the Army Cyber Institute, obviously the Cyber Cooperative Defense Institute in Estonia. Thank you very much for so many of you that have come out today. Would like to recognize my good friend, Lieutenant General Bob Caslin, fantastic leadership as a superintendent at the United States Military Academy, and then, of course, the Honorable Marina Kaljurand here, the former foreign minister at Estonia. So good to have you here today. Very, very honored to open this conference today with just a few thoughts. And so today I've been asked to talk about what's going to impact or what's going to contribute or what is going to be the things that are going to influence future cyber conflict. And so as I think about that, I would tell you, let me begin with really perspective. Really three perspectives that I would offer before I get into the main part of my speech. The first thing is that it is amazing to see the rate of change. And I know all of you out there say, yeah, that's a blinding fact of the obvious, General, everything is moving fast. But I would tell you, if you step back and you think about technology, if you think about data, if you think about the Internet of Things, if you think about talent, I would tell you it's amazing how fast things are changing. 3.8 billion users on the Internet today, 2.7 billion with a B, social media. It took radio 38 years to hit 50 million people. It took Twitter 9 months. If we think about the changes, you know, as Bob Caslin talked about 1975, I hate to admit that I remember the Cray computers. I also remember what was touch-tone dialing like and what came before touch-tone dialing. I would assure you my children today would say anything that came before smartphones belongs down the road at the Smithsonian. So with that, think about the rate of change that we're going through today. Had a discussion over the weekend about the next mobile phone. My kids, my twin 15-year-olds said, hey, Dad, thinking about the iPhone 10, what do you think? I said, I think it costs $1,000. And they said, well, how about the Samsung S9? You know, this idea, this perspective of change, I took a step back and I thought, 15-year-old boys, 15 years ago, there were no smartphones. We had flip phones, and if you were really high speed, you had a slide phone. When 5 years of age hit them, the iPhone was released. When they hit 10, apps were coming online. We had a proliferation of apps. Our BlackBerries all went away, and by 15 years old, they're talking about the iPhone 10 or the Samsung S9. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the environment that we operate in today. Perspective 2. Our adversaries are antagonists. Their capabilities, their capacities are ever increasing. You know, as an officer in the United States Army, 10 years ago, we thought about exploitation, the exploitation of our networks. That was spying, right? We were getting into other people's networks. We were stealing their secrets, taking their data surreptitiously. That's why 2007 was so important to us, because we saw what a denial of service attack actually did to a nation, what it had as an impact upon a country. We thought to ourselves, wow, if it's no longer exploitation, it's disruption now. What's next? Well, what's next is destruction. And we saw that in 2012, 2013, Saudi Aramco. We saw it with RasGas. We saw it, oh, by the way, in the fall of 2014 with Sony Pictures Entertainment. We saw what destruction was like. But remember, this was against what? A network or a series of networks. Where are we at now in terms of our conversation with our adversaries and understanding what they may do? It has broadened. What did OPM teach us in the fall of 2015? Data matters. Data matters tremendously. In fact, it's the new high ground. It's the new key terrain. If you have data, you have information. If you have information, you have power. And so no longer are we just thinking about our networks. Now we're thinking about our data. And oh, by the way, what are we thinking about now? We're thinking about our weapon systems. We're thinking about our critical infrastructure and key resources. So as you think about where our adversaries and our antagonists have gone, think about that paradigm. Think about that perspective. I would also tell you that I think we're starting to see the trailers of a future war in what we've seen over the past couple years. Let's rewind the clock to the summer of 2014. Israel faces 4 different enemies as they're battling with adversaries with regards to the Gaza Strip. Who were they? They were Hezbollah. They were Hamas. They were Iran. They were anonymous. Anonymous, a proxy, a non-nation state, an actor that we had never even thought about before, now is having an impact, an antagonist against a country that is battling. And oh, by the way, where were these adversaries and antagonists going after? They weren't necessarily going after military networks. They were going after the economic might of that nation. They were going after the DNS servers. They were going after other key terrain that they knew was fundamental to how that country was able to operate, how that country was able to empower their economy. So that's perspective 2. Perspective 3, the Department of Defense, our Army, has done an incredible amount of work over the past 7 years to move forward in the cyber domain. But even with all that work, I would tell you that we are outrunning our headlights. We are learning so much, whether or not it's with our forces, with our doctrine, with our strategy, that we are well forward of where we ever thought we would ever be. So over the past 5 years, what has the department done? The department has done really 3 things: strategy and doctrine. 2 different strategies, getting ready for the 3rd strategy with regards to cyberspace. The Army has written doctrine, Field Manual 3, TAC 12, that talks about cyber electromagnetic activities. We've also built a series of headquarters. So all the services have stood up Service Cyber Component Commands. If you take a look at where we're at today, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and even the Coast Guard have a component command that is looking specifically at cyber. And perhaps the game changer, at least for us as we take a look at our department, is 6,187 men and women, military and civilian, across 133 teams, both offense and defense and support. That is our capability that we've built over the past 5 years. It's also a capability that we've employed defensively, and I would tell you offensively as well, as we take a look at the work that has been done over the past several years, really the past 2 years, against ISIS. Offensive cyber activities and operations against an adversary of our country and our lives. And what have we learned? A tremendous amount of things in terms of how do we structure our force, how do we employ that force, how do we command and control that force, how do we bring capabilities to the forefront, how do we take a defensive team and ensure that it's informed by the offense, how do we take really good intelligence, whether it's from the private sector or it's from government, and empower a team. And we are rewriting doctrine today. We are rewriting our strategies today. We are rewriting the way that we teach our forces. That's why I would tell you that even with the tremendous amount of work that we've done within our department, we're running faster than our headlights because we are learning so much. We're employing these forces today. We're having an impact. So in terms of where do I see the items, the activities, the thoughts that are going to inform future cyber conflict? Well, let me begin with people, because I would tell you that at the end of the day, it all does come back to people. And my thought in terms of people are, let me give you just a couple sound bites in terms of where I see people in future cyber conflict. So one of the things that we have learned over the past 12 to 18 months is the super empowered individual. Super empowered individual. Let me give you a little bit of background. If you were going to say, hey, what are the really critical jobs that you do on your teams? One of the most critical jobs is a tool developer, a coder. You know, software doesn't write itself, right? We have coders that do that still. Well, these super empowered individuals, these coders, these tool developers, our best ones, I would tell you, and this is back of the envelope math, are 50 or 100 times better than their peers. 50 or 100 times better. Now, I've been in a number of different Army units, and I'm trying to think in my mind, is there a sniper that I've ever met? Or is there a pilot? Or is there a submarine driver? Or is there anyone else in the military that's 50 times their peer? It's tough for me to imagine, but I would tell you that some of the coders that we have are 50 times their peers. Let me give you one example. A year ago, the common narrative across the press, and I would say across many people's thinking, is that ISIS was uncontested in virtual space. There was nothing we could do to them. When they got into virtual space, they could push their messages, they could tweet their ideas, they could share their propaganda rapidly. And there was nothing that we were able to do about that. I would tell you over the past 9 to 12 months, we have taken that on, and that narrative is no longer true. And I would tell you that we are contesting their message every day. If you take a look at the quantity, if you take a look at the quality, if you take a look at what they're able to do, that has been impacted by our teams. But I would tell you behind those teams is an individual, an officer. Who is that 50X coder that I talked about? He's the person that has developed the ideas in terms of social media and how to get after ISIS in that space. He's the idea that went out to academia. He's the idea that looked at private industry and said, hey, this is what we need to do to get after an adversary in virtual space. That's the power of the super empowered individual. The other piece I would share with you is it's very interesting to command an organization where the true talent and brain power is certainly not at the top, but is at the beginning stages, okay? It's the lieutenants, it's the sergeants, it's the young captains that have this remarkable talent. Now, I don't know too many Army units where you would go in and you'd say, hey, I know that the E6 knows more about what they're gonna do than the O6. But I would tell you that if you take a look at our forces today, the talent, the technical ability is at the lower level. And it's going to be that way for probably a generation as they cycle through. That's not to say that those of us that are at the 06 level or above don't have a job. We certainly have a job. And we have a responsibility in terms of leadership, and we have a responsibility in terms of synchronization. We have a certain responsibility in terms of vision. But I come back to this idea of people being one of the key critical functions in future cyber conflict. You have to understand that with that talent at the bottom, this changes the paradigm in terms of how you train them. This changes the paradigm in terms of how you mentor them, right? Because what I think I'm doing today is developing the future mentors of tomorrow. But where do the future mentors of today rest? So idea number 1, future cyber conflict, heavily influenced by people. Idea number 2, future cyber conflict, heavily influenced by technology. In fact, if we take a look at today, we're seeing the leap ahead technologies that are there. No, there's a meme out there that goes something like this. If you're going to operate in cyberspace, it's always better to be the attacker than the defender. Because when you're the attacker, you only have to be right once. When you're the defender, you've got to be right all the time. What happens if that narrative was switched? What happens if the defender was right 100% of the time, and the attacker had the problem accessing the network? We saw that for the first time in August of 2016 at the DARPA Grand Challenge. Machine learning mayhem. Dr. David Brumley took a group of very, very talented students and graduate students and created a capability that allowed us to see what the future is going to be like. The self-healing network. The ability to be able to patch rapidly at machine speed those vulnerabilities. The ability to actually lock out advanced persistent threats. Oh, by the way, the ability to do this with a fraction of the number of workforce. And so as we think about that, think about the implications that has for our Army and for our nation. But I'd also say I would take that a step further as we think about technology. What about artificial intelligence? What about machine learning? Today we see that heavily as we take a look at UAVs, autonomous vehicles, the ability for us to think about having an Uber ride without a driver. Wow, looking forward to that. In 2021, in fact, I understand that we're going to probably start seeing the first autonomous vehicles being sold in the public market. Think about the implications that has for our economy. But let's take a step back. Think about that same artificial intelligence, think about that same machine learning, and apply it now not to the defense, but apply it to the offense. Because anyone that's been in the audience that has done exploitation or done effects work or has done unnet operations understands that it's really easy to say, hey, I'm going to get onto this network, look for a vulnerability, achieve presence, and have a persistent ability to go after whatever I want to do in the future. What if you had a machine that did that, that actually found the vulnerabilities, that rapidly was able to identify a vulnerability, put down an implant, have persistence, and do that at machine speed? You've just taken away a tremendous amount of our workforce, a tremendous amount of the work that we do today that is really the art of getting onto a network. Think about what those implications are as we move to the future. Because the nations that are most poised to do that today, I think you would begin with the large nation states, Russia, China, the United States, others that are in that. But also think that artificial intelligence is not being driven by governments these days. It's being driven by the private sector. Samsung, last year, $13 billion in R&D. So think about the implications of technology with a small country like Korea that's able to develop that, or the country of Singapore, or the country of Japan, or any other modern nation state, or for that matter, perhaps even a non-nation state that's able to leverage that technology. Think about the implications for military superiority. Think about the implications for economic superiority. Think about the implications for information superiority. Third element I would share with you in terms of future cyber conflict, it's about partnerships. Well said, cyber is a team sport. A team sport, okay? When we think about team sports, I would say within the Department of Defense, we normally think about what? The interagency, the intelligence community, industry, academia. And what are we looking for in terms of our partnerships? Well, we're certainly looking for early warning, right? We're looking for any indication of trouble. We're also looking for the ability to share information. We're also looking for the ability to have a presence somewhere. I mean, what is the great ability for our nation and other nations that are joined together is to have a presence around the globe. These networks are global. Our ability to have a presence global is predicated on very, very good partnerships. But it's also the idea of being able to leverage authorities. There are certain authorities that elements of our government bring that we in the Department of Defense do not have. The ability to leverage those partnerships, to leverage those authorities, to leverage the capabilities and talent, to leverage all of that provides us, I would tell you, an asymmetric advantage as we take a look at the threats of the future. And I would tell you, if we think about partnerships a little more broadly, the area that I would dive deep into is how do we form that partnership that talks about the security of our nation and our allies in cyberspace? What is that going to need to look like? Well, it's going to need to look like something where we can share information rapidly, probably at machine speed. It's going to need to look like something where we have the trust to share information rapidly, not between governments necessarily, but oftentimes between governments and industry. It's going to have to look at and be aware of future threats. And where are those future threats going to be most informed of? Probably from the private sector, or academia, or the intelligence community. I would tell you, if you think about partnerships, and I see that as a third major element of future cyber conflict, that's where we have to be able to build towards. And as we take a look at the defense of our nation and our defense of our allies in cyberspace, This is the great partnership of the future. So ladies and gentlemen, as we look to the future, you know, it is interesting to look back and say, hey, what we really need to be able to do is to be able to leverage the knowledge of the past. And so if you take a look at the perspectives I've shared, if you take a look at people, if you take a look at technology, if you take a look at partnerships, I say those are the three major influencers for future cyber conflict. Now to kind of steal a line or a phrase from the great cybersecurity analyst Leon Trotsky, you may not be interested in cyber, but cyber is definitely interested in you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your patience. Thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to take a few questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some time for questions. In the room, we have several people, ACI, with microphones. So if anybody has any questions, please just make yourself known to one of our ACI members. Panel one.
Yes, you mentioned the need to somewhat collaborate with industry and mentioning the Sony hack and some of the other OPM, other hacks that have gone on outside of DoD spaces. What is the military's plan to start collaborating with industry in defending the entire nation's networks, not just DoD networks? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that is a strategy right now that is obviously being developed by the Department of Defense in terms of, you know, how do we be a participant, because this is obviously a whole of nation, and that when I say a whole of nation, that's not only government, that's industry, that's the Department of Defense to do this. So our element of it is being developed right now as part of a strategy that the Secretary has been talking about with Congress. I would say that, you know, right now as we take a look, you know, we do have the procedures upon which we would assist other elements of the government through defense support to civil authorities. But I say, as I would mention that as I said in the speech, you know, I think the great partnership as we take a look at the future is how do you develop this whole of nation capability? And this is something that I think that partnerships really have to lead to. This is the grand challenge for us as we take a look at the future. Thanks for your question.
We have one in the back and the front.
Thanks, Patrick Tucker with Defense One. Thank you so much for your talk. I noticed that you touched very briefly on this idea of authorities and moving more capability closer to spear tip, closer to this super coder, 50 times greater than any other coder in the world. Both Admiral Rogers and General Votel have discussed the need to move more authorities closer to the spear tip, closer to the operational edge. And they've expressed, I think, a little bit of frustration and impatience about how quickly that can happen. So can you let us know within the Department of Defense, in their conversations, how is that move going to move more authorities closer to the actual operators? And what's your opinion of this idea? Thanks.
Well, let me start with the last part of the question. In terms of my view, I think that this is, as I talked about in my speech, one of the things that we have learned is that a number of the issues that we had never even considered now are starting to come to the forefront. So how do we empower the right forces with the right authorities is obviously among those. In terms of where the department is headed, I would defer to the department to answer that question, but let me tell you where our Army is headed. As we take a look at this, we have realized that if you take a look at cyber or EW or information operations, we believe that we have to train that with our forward forces. And so wherever those authorities exist and however we're going to leverage them is one thing, but the other thing that I would tell you is we have to be able to look at a tactical force, whether or not it's a brigade combat team or some other type of force, and see how they might operate and leverage the authorities. And so what we have done as an Army over the past 2 years is through 8 different rotations is empower these brigade combat teams with elements that go after social media, elements that take a look at their own networks for vulnerability, elements that look at close access. So we as an Army are already training towards that. I would tell you that I think that this discussion on authorities will continue to mature as we have learned more. And I think that what we have to do is we have to be prepared, particularly as a force, to be able to leverage those once they do come. Thanks, Patrick.
In the back, number 1.
Hi, General Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. A related question. You've been talking mostly about strategic cyber. That last question got us more into operational and tactical. When you move away from the strategic level, you move away from fiber optics and undersea cables to the electromagnetic spectrum, which becomes intimately, inextricably entangled with cyber. And there's a lot of anxiety I see in the community that, in the rush to catch up to cyber, which is the new and scary thing, we have neglected or sidelined reviving sort of the Cold War EW skills that actually get the data there over the airwaves. How are you all addressing these two conjoined domains?
Yeah, so great question, Mr. Freeberg. Good to see you again. I would tell you that as we take a look at it as an Army, I mean, that's how we have approached it with regards to we not only need cyber capabilities, whether or not that's at a brigade combat team or, as you say, at a strategic element, we need EW capabilities. And so we have equipped our force. We are now taking a look at how do we build the force structure upon which to go at that. And I would imagine that force structure is going to be at a brigade combat team. It's going to be empowering a division. It's going to be able to be leveraged by a corps. But I think that what we have to also step back and say is that with that EW capability, there's times when you're going to need to have a high-end capability, and that may be through cyber. And where does that come from? I would say that it comes from very small teams that are empowered by a headquarters, that have the authorities, that have the operational floors, that have the capabilities upon which to do reach. And so I think those come together. I don't think it's an either or, I think it's an and. Thanks, Sydney. Let me take one more, please.
Over on the left side.
Sir Cadet Kane, could you speak on the Army's plan to defend against non-state actors that don't typically have a leadership structure that we can exploit in the traditional sense, or really any way to clearly define their membership?
Can you repeat the last part, I'm sorry, again?
How do we defend against non-state actors that don't have a leadership structure that we can see in traditional militaries, or a way to clearly define their membership, sir?
Yeah, so we have an experience with this, and I would say that experience has been drawn largely from what we're doing against ISIS today. I believe that defense obviously begins with being able to defend our network, our data systems, our weapons platforms. But the other thing is that we have to be able to look and find out where these elements operate from. Who are they empowered by? And what are their weaknesses? And from that, we develop our capabilities, we do our targeting, and then we move forward, all within the confines of, obviously, the rules of law and the ways that we have always conducted warfare. So I appreciate your question. Thanks much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. Thanks much for your attention.